So here we are. It's February 24th. This is a panel discussion of real estate ethics. I'm Andrew Fiala, and I'm the director of the Ethics Center here at Fresno State. And I just want to thank AJ, the director of the Gazarian Center, because this was really his idea last fall. So Dr. Jauregui reached out to me, and we talked and consulted a little bit, and we put together this panel of experts to talk about ethics in real estate. So a big shout out and thank you to the Gazarian Center and to our colleagues who are joining us and students who are joining us. This is an ethics event, and we were talking even before we got started about, we want to make sure that we're practicing civility and critical thinking, and we may talk about some contentious issues. We're exploring ideas here. We're going to do our best to make sense of things. And if you disagree in the audience, you're welcome to post something in the Q&A or the chat, but make it civil and make it productive, right? So we don't want to yell at each other. We want to actually think through some questions and ideas. So my job here is to moderate this, and I'm going to introduce our guests and then throw a question to them and then mostly let them talk. So let me begin with introductions. I'll start with Ken Neufeld, who holds a California real estate broker's license and has been involved in the real estate industry for over 40 years. He's currently the co-chair of the Professional Standards Committee of the Fresno Association of Realtors and teaches a monthly online code of ethics course for new realtors. Throughout his career, he's been an active advocate for the ethical practice of real estate and also for fair housing and the needs of entry-level and lower-income buyers. Recently, he was appointed to the Fair Housing Committee of the National Association of Realtors. His community involvement includes teaching of first-time buyer classes for the Fresno Housing Authority and over 20 years as an active board member of the Coalition for Urban Renewal Excellence. Ken, thank you for joining us. Next, we have Andres or AJ Jauregui, who is the director of the Gazarian Real Estate Center and associate professor of real estate in the Department of Finance and Business Law here at Fresno State. His undergraduate degree is from the International University of the Americas in Costa Rica, originally from Argentina, I believe. He has an MS in economics and a PhD in applied economics from Auburn University, where he focused on real estate, environmental, and urban economics. He served on the board of directors of the Community Housing Council, the Kings River Conservancy, and he continues to serve on the board of directors of the U.S. Green Building Council of Central California chapter. He's published in a number of journals. Thank you again, AJ, for thinking this whole thing up. And then finally, I'd like to introduce Jacqui Curry, who is a Fresno State graduate who graduated with a bachelor's degree in business administration focused on real estate and urban land economics. She has also earned a law degree, a JD, from the San Joaquin College of Law in Clovis. She's currently an assistant professor here at Fresno State. Her research and professional activities focus on real estate valuation and ethics. She's also a realtor broker associate with CHC Realty, where there's a focus to help underrepresented populations attain and retain home ownership through education and support. She's worked in the real estate industry since 2004 in various positions. So thank you to our panelists. So let me kick it off and get started. So we kind of talked about some questions and topics in a previous meeting. The first one, maybe softball question, is what is the value of the real estate profession? How does the profession contribute to society, the economy, and so on? We want to get this on the table. What's the good provided by the real estate industry? And how does that connect to ethics? Ken, maybe you want to start us off as the voice of experience and all of that?
Since I am in the profession, originally, or say 40 years ago, the role of the real estate professional was to basically be the keeper of information and to be the source to which buyers and sellers would come to determine what they could sell or what they could buy. That has all changed with the advent of the internet and with various, the information about homes is all available for sale right now. So the role of the professional today is more one of consultation and buyer or seller representation, because there is a rather quite a maze of laws that you have to pass through when going through a real estate transaction, and the real estate professional is the one that can help with that.
Jacqui, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I do. So, when you talk about real estate, and this is something I talk to my classes about, it really touches almost everything that's paramount to our lives. And I think we really learned this with Shelter in Place. I think it really pronounced that desire for community and where we live and how important that purchase may be. I know there are a lot of different types of real estate transactions, but the most common would be a buyer purchasing their home, right? Or a seller selling a property to a buyer. And that relationship that that person has with their realtor professional, the real estate professionals, is really one based on trust and honesty. And I don't know anything more ethically based than trust and honesty, when you take these transactions into account. So it's extremely important in our industry, the real estate profession, to have, outstanding adherence to a code of ethics. That's paramount, right? And then at the same time, we touch almost every facet of our lives with some type of land use or real estate transaction.
So we'll talk about your code of ethics, I think, in a little bit. That was one of our questions, but I think that's good to know, right? That the profession is governed by a code of ethics
Absolutely.
and board of ethics and so on. Andres, AJ, how about you?
I can add that, well, academically or in the academic field, we find that real estate agents are considered to be intermediary between buyers and sellers, particularly in some transaction. And so they help buyers, sellers find each other, basically. And so their role is that of information, as Ken mentioned, even though nowadays, like Ken mentioned, information is out there, but still the role of the real estate agent is to make sense of all that information and actually have more of helping buyers, helping sellers realize what is it that they want in their best interest, right? We can also add that, we're talking from, just the real estate agent side. There's other, parts of the real estate industry that also, mortgage lenders, appraisers, all other, the real estate industry is really big. It's a multi-billion-dollar, industry. And so all of these layers, they all have different characteristics and values that add up to the performance of the industry.
Yeah, just to add what Dr. AJ said, I think it's said that the real estate profession offers the widest choices of careers in almost any business discipline. And so it is just a wide variety of different things.
Yep.
Does it matter if the agent or whoever represents the buyer or the seller, are the obligations the same, or is there a difference in terms of the goals and the mechanisms and the ethics of all that for buyers versus sellers agents?
Well, one of the first forms that we always are required to use in a real estate transaction is the disclosure regarding agency relationships. And in agency relationships, you could have a buyer's agent, a seller's agent, or an agent representing both the buyer and the seller. But the duties are the same. Primarily, if you're representing the seller, you have a fiduciary duty of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty in your relationships with the seller. Now, if you're representing the buyer, it'd be the same. Now, the problem becomes, what if you're representing both? And our attorney friends would say that's not very possible to do, but in real estate law, realtors are still allowed to represent both buyers and sellers.
Yeah, what Ken is referring to, the last one is called dual agency, and according to California real estate law, that's allowed as long as both parties, that is the buyer and the seller, know of what the role is of the agent to both parties, so that they have to not only know but agree that that the agent is going to serve both, both sides, which could present several issues, maybe for discussion in another, or part of this, panel, but certainly it's a pretty interesting situation when that happens.
Ken, you use this word fiduciary, which is a great word, can you explain that to the audience? And what does that exactly mean?
Well, to act as a fiduciary, you are treating the other person's affairs and business as if it were your own.
And that's because this shows up, right, like in stockbrokers. I mean, like, legal financial advisors, right? This kind of insurance agents also have that.
Lawyers
as well.
Yeah, kind of common in professional ethics, yes. I think, in many of these fields. Well,
particularly when you're representing someone that is not necessarily in the same space that you are. So, for instance, the real estate agents, they're going to be doing a lot of activities for the seller, for the buyer, but the buyer or the seller may not be physically present, right, for those activities, and therefore, it is you are representing that person, and so you have to represent them in a way that is going to be beneficial to them, and that's part of this whole fiduciary responsibilities that you have.
I think it's important to note too that you can't put your own desires or needs above what that is of your client, no matter what the situation is. Especially I agree with AJ, when you're in a situation where you're making decisions or reviewing things without the client there, that you want to be sure that their needs are first.
So let's move on to our second question, which was about education, real estate education, real estate ethics education. Two of our panelists are Fresno State professors who are thinking about education at Fresno State. And then we have Ken, who's a trainer for professionals working in the field. You want to tell us a little bit about how ethics education works, either on campus or off campus, in the profession, ongoing training, and so on?
I'll let Ken start with, the profession side, and we'll talk about, Jacqui and I, we can talk about in what we do, or in general in college level education.
Well, the National Association of Realtors requires every new realtor to have 2 hours of ethics training before they are allowed to use the term realtor in their business. So every month we at the Fresno Association of Realtors host a training program, and during the last 2 years it's been on Zoom, where we go over the code of ethics with our new orientees. Then after you are in the real estate business and are a realtor, every 2 years we are required to do a 2-hour refresher course in ethics training as well. So there's quite a bit of emphasis on ethics training.
In higher education, ethics training is not necessarily, it's not actually a course in itself specific, like it is in the profession or in the professional associations. It's generally done within a course. For instance, we teach real estate practices, which is one of the courses that needs to be taken in order to apply for the California real estate license. And so in that real estate practice course, and in Jacqui, when she teaches real estate law, there are components within that course where we emphasize, the ethical implications of the real estate agent's actions, disclosures that need to be done, laws, fair, housing laws, and all of that have obviously ethical implications. But it's there, you won't find a college or community college or university that has a course in ethics in real estate. It might be, you'll likely find, it's probable, but it's very unlikely, right? Jacqui, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the honesty and trust component of real estate transactions just lends itself perfectly to scenario typed education. And so both in real estate law and appraisal, we go over a lot of scenarios, kind of like, what would you do situations, as well as look at some of the research. For instance, the case that Dr. AJ has brought up before about some bias in a real estate appraisal. We talk about that case and what the implications are and how it could have been avoided, and the importance of being an ethical real estate professional. And again, mostly just scenario based. What would you do in this situation? How could it have been avoided?
Additionally,
Go ahead, Ken. Go ahead.
To the question of real estate education, real estate licensees in California are required to do 45 hours of continuing education every 4 years. And one of the required courses in that 45 hours is a 3-hour course in ethics.
Now,
Ken,
prior
prior
to that, prior to obtaining a license, there's a few educational requirements, not necessarily specific in ethics, but they may include as part of the courses, ethical components, like I mentioned, and real estate principles, practices, real estate law, and all the others are,
They
that are required.
They need 3 college level courses before they can even write the real estate exam, which I'm sure that Fresno State is offering some of those courses.
Yeah, we offer those courses. And one of the things that we wanted to mention here as well is that starting 2023, the law is actually requiring that the courses real estate practices and real estate law have actual components, specific components on implicit bias and their impact on the industry, as well as fair housing laws and real estate law. They have to teach that, not only have the teaching of, but also have interactive, simulations and role playing of situations that may come up with, in this fair housing, issues. So now we're moving in the real estate industry. We're moving to having, specific content that needs to be addressed in these courses, whereas before it was take the courses, pass them, take the exam, and then go and start working. Whereas now, if you don't have that instruction in those specific topics, then you're not going to get the exam, or you're not going to get the license.
Mm-hmm.
This may be a little bit cheeky question, but I think people are kind of sometimes confused about ethics. It's sometimes you just think it means obeying the law, right? So as long as you do what the law requires or don't do what the law disallows, right? As long as you're just obeying the law, that's sufficient. And when you're thinking about this, either at Fresno State or in the training, is it more than just knowing how to apply the rules? And then also maybe how does that connect to these scenario-based questions and approaches, like when you're going through case studies? Is it just applying the law correctly, or how does that all work out in your thinking about this?
Well, I think we might, sorry, Jacqui, go ahead.
Okay. No, go ahead, Ken. I'll address it after.
We might be spilling over into our next area of discussion, which is the Code of Ethics, which in the Code of Ethics, there are 3 sections to the Code of Ethics. The first section is the duties to clients and customers. And the very first article in the Code of Ethics, which I think will answer the question that you're raising, is the primary duty of the realtor is to promote and protect the interest of their client. So that's more than just not speeding on the highway. That is going beyond that. It's an active caring for your client, promoting and protecting the client's best interest.
Yeah, I was just going to say it can get personal, right? What your personal code of ethics might be above and beyond or different than what is in the actual code of ethics for real estate professionals. You bring up a good point. I think it actually states in the code of ethics, Ken, correct me if I'm incorrect, but it says something about if the law is different than the code of ethics, obviously you need to abide by the law. But I think the understanding for most people is that ethics is more than just about doing legally what's right or wrong. An example of this would be that being a dual agent, like we talked about before, is absolutely legal. But I can tell you that for my personal experience, being a dual agent is not something that I would ever want to be. And that's personal to me, right? I know that it's perfectly legal. I've had in-depth conversation with other realtors that really like that dual agency position, and more power to them. It's just not something that I personally could do in my own practice, if that makes sense. So I think it can be very personal, the code of ethics and what you abide by.
And I would support what you're saying, Jacqui, as well. I always feel better when I'm just representing one party in the transaction, but sometimes it just falls into my lap, as it were, and then one needs to be very careful to make sure they are really protecting everybody's best interest.
And that's why I chose my words carefully and said that I'm happy that I have not been in the position, because I can see where there might be times where you really are the best person to represent both sides. And so you just disclose that and carry on with those duties. I've been fortunate not to be in that position so far.
So you can see from the example that Ken and Jacqui just mentioned that you could actually be, doing something legal, but not necessarily according to your own ethical standards be ethical. And so, right. We could probably say that, some real estate agents, the majority of real estate agents, they take ethics to be above and beyond the law, which is great for the profession.
We're getting a couple chat and Q&A things. Mind if I just pick one from the Q&A, which is for Ken, because this had to do with this dual agency thing. I don't know, Ken, if you can see that in the Q&A, but Myrna says, Ken, what is your suggestion to assure that you are able to do due diligence for the client when in a dual agency? And well, go ahead. What's your thought about that?
Well, if you're representing a buyer and a seller, for example, if you know, number one, if you know the seller's bottom line, it would not be incumbent upon you to pass that bottom line on to the buyer because you're compromising the seller's position. By the same token, if you know how much the buyer was willing to pay, and you again you wouldn't pass that on to the seller. The best way of dealing with dual agency is letting everything be done on paper. So in other words, you ask the seller, here's an offer, how do you want to respond? And then let's put it on paper. I will take that paper to the buyer and see what the buyer has to say about it. So that's a good way of keeping clear lines. The other thing is when you're representing a seller, especially if you are also, if there's multiple offers and you have one of the offers, that's a very touchy situation. Right. The best way of handling that, Myrna, in my opinion, is to be as objective as possible. And the way to be objective is by producing a seller's net sheet to show what each transaction in this multiple offer situation, what that will net the seller. So you've got, again, it's on paper, you're looking at numbers, so you really strive for objectivity, which I think will help you to be a good fiduciary.
AJ or Jacqui, do you want to address that question?
What I would add to that, which is very interesting, is that generally we consider residential, the residential market, buyers and seller purchasing, very emotional. But what Ken is trying to say is that one way to deal with a dual agency is actually to be less emotional and go just with the facts, right? Particularly if you're dealing with a dual situation with multiple offers.
Correct.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I'm not saying it can't be done. It absolutely can be. I just would rather not be in that position.
Right.
And I'm not defending it either.
Yeah.
So let me just, I'm going to throw this question out and let's continue to think about it. Because AJ had asked this prior to starting the panel, is the question of, does this ethics training do any good? So does education about ethics, either in higher ed or ongoing professional ethics training, does it actually make people more ethical? Does it produce more ethical realtors? I don't know if you want to address that now. We
Well,
also
you're
wanted to talk a little
you're
about
the ethics professor.
Yeah.
You should answer that question now.
I have opinions, but I wanted to hear what you got. It's your field we're talking about. What do you think?
What do you think, Ken? Go ahead.
Well, I would say, first of all, the National Association of Realtors began sometime back in 1906 or 1907. And by 1913, they decided that they needed to have a professional code of ethics. So very early on in the history of the National Association of Realtors, they saw education as a benefit and something that was needed to separate themselves, their members, from others that did not adhere to the same standards. Over the years, the code of ethics has changed and has been heightened, and also to address the needs that are currently out there in current society. And so we think education is good because we shudder to think what it would be like without it.
Yeah, and to say something, the National Association of Realtors, it prides itself to have this code of ethics in place, and also to use it. It uses it to their advantage to give more validity to a designation of a realtor designation, right? And maybe Ken, you could also explain now at this point the difference between a real estate agent and a realtor, which sometimes people use interchangeably, and they're not, right?
Right. Many people think that everyone who assists people in buying and selling real estate is a realtor. That is not the case. A realtor is one who is a member of the National Association of Realtors, their state organization of realtors, as well as the local association of realtors, and they adhere to the principles of the professional standards and code of ethics. And in the state of California, these statistics might be a couple of years old, but at that point, there were like 500,000 real estate licensees in the state of California, which is a lot of licenses. But only 200,000 of those were realtors, or members of the National Association of Realtors.
And is this right that the realtors then adhere to this code of ethics? Like that's a fundamental feature of the designation of realtor?
Yes, the realtors are, well, they're supposed to adhere to the code of ethics, right? And then if they don't, then by virtue of them being a realtor, we do have mechanisms for calling them to account.
So could you tell us a little more about the code? So you mentioned at one point, I think the first principle is something like must be a benefit to who you're representing, right? That kind of fiduciary.
Right.
What else
Well,
is in that code?
The code of ethics has 17 articles, so it is kind of cumbersome. But there's 3 sections to the code. There's the first section, which has to do with duties to clients and customers, which I already mentioned. Then there's a section having to do with duties to the public. And the third section is duties to other realtors. So in the duties to the public, I don't know if you want me to go there. We could maybe introduce one of the main things in duties to the public is that we're going to treat everyone fairly and equally, regardless of their ethnic origin, their religion, their marital status, their sex, their sexual orientation, their gender identity, etc. Everybody gets equal treatment, and that is what we're expecting of our realtor members, which is also the law, fair housing, right? We recently added to that section in 2020, in the aftermath of the George Floyd situation and a lot of racial unrest in this country. We found that even realtors were posting things on their social media that were not really appropriate for realtors to be posting, because they were disparaging remarks about certain groups of people. And so this came to the attention of our Professional Standards Committee. And so in 2020, we added an article that said that before it was that we are not supposed to do these bad things while we're in a real estate transaction. which just limited the time that we shouldn't be discriminating and saying and using,
Derogatory.
Right.
derogatory terms, right? So now the code says we're not to do this at any time. We're and on social media or wherever, 24/7, we're obligated not to use disparaging remarks regarding any particular protected class of people.
I have one great hope about the future, which is that professionals are going to keep things stable because of this kind of thing, right? So like what you're saying is that the professionals in the real estate industry have decided that we have to behave ourselves at all times.
Right.
And, I've heard similar things happening in other professions, other industries, right? It's not just about what you do on the job, but it's about sort of like living as a good citizen in our world.
What a novel term.
Right.
That's really great. It's good. And it's interesting to hear that that's a response to the racial unrest of the last couple of years. Jacqui, or AJ, do you want to add anything about that?
Yeah, and what I want to say is that it also speaks about how fluid this, world is, and how changing it is. So we're still, like I mentioned, come 2023, there's already, changes in the educational requirements to become a real estate, agent or in the state of California, which speaks about how we are constantly seeing, even though you do have the National Association of Realtors and the local chapters with their code of ethics, and other real estate professional associations have their own, code of ethics as well that they try to follow. You still see, let's call them the bad apple, orange, whatever, here and there that, bring eventually, bring awareness that it may not just be enough, or that we need to continuously be, making ourselves remind that these situations are not okay, that they need to be, taken care of. And one way to do that is through more education, more training, more, providing, individuals, professionals with the necessary tools to deal with these situations when they present themselves.
And going back to your original question, does the training and education matter? I'm going to borrow some words of yours, Dr. Fiala, and that is, it can't hurt, right? I think the Code of Ethics gives us a barometer of this is what we should be doing. Are we following that? We didn't follow that here. Why not? What can we do to make that better, right? And like AJ said, it's always fluid on how do we make that better? How do we get that training and education so that it matters to the professionals that they're doing things ethically within that code?
So let's push a little deeper, maybe a little more pointed question. In the Q&A, Professor Avalos, Antonio Avalos, who's an economics professor here at Fresno State, has posed the question that actually connects to what our next topic we did want to talk about. So let me read Antonio's question to you and then get some responses. He says, in the news, we've seen situations where certain populations of color, for example, sell homes for a lower price than other populations, white, for example, for fully comparable houses in fully comparable neighborhoods, which suggests that some market inequities possibly reflect ethical shortcomings on the part of real estate agents. What do you think the consequences are for those agents who don't follow the code of ethics and who are basically contributing to inequality? And I might just add in, and you know this very well, that wealth disparities in our culture often have to do with access to home ownership, right? Because that's going to be the biggest investment that people make.
Absolutely agree.
So what do you all think about this question?
Let's go with Ken's response first.
Oh, you got me on the hot seat here. I would say, first of all, that real estate agents don't really set the value of property so much as the market itself. If you, being kind of a from a capitalist perspective, right? But sometimes the values get challenged, and that is when it comes to an appraisal. So I'm sort of defending the real estate agent here a bit, although the appraisers are also part of our organization as well. And so, but there have been instances of appraisal bias, and we as realtors are concerned about that. In fact, we've had some task forces working on appraisal bias at the national and state level. So I don't know if that goes 100% of the way, but maybe that's a start to your answer, Dr. Avalos.
The valuations are part of the problem, and it's the appraisers who are giving the valuation. What about the lending agents and the mortgage brokers, and does that come in too?
So the way that it works is that the lenders are going to be working off of the appraisal. So they're going to be, the lenders, they're giving money, to buy the house, but they are going to be using the house as a collateral for the amount owed. And so, but they're going to base that amount that they're allowed to give to the buyer on the appraised value, just basically saying, well, we think that this property is worth X, so we'll give you a percentage of that X value. That X value doesn't necessarily is the price that the buyer has to pay for that property. And so at this times, in this crazy times that we're seeing, that the appraised value could be substantially lower than the actual price. But that is because of what Ken was saying, market conditions and all that. Mm-hmm. The problem comes when that appraised value may end up being biased because of certain characteristics of the property owners, and that has caught up a few cases have come up to light in the last couple of years that have set up several studies or a few studies, and as a consequence, more education and training and all that kind of stuff.
And this is really, I think, an important point, is that we talked a little bit about emotion and that real estate can be an emotional decision. And I recently saw a video, I think it was by, I think Perception, maybe Ken knows the name of it, but Perception Institute or Perception Studies. Anyway, it was a video about real estate professionals needing to pay more attention to facts instead of just going with their gut. And I thought that was interesting because we always talk about it as an emotional decision, but that the professional needs to kind of remove whatever, including implicit bias, right? Because that is based on probably more of an emotion of something with your experiences through life, and that you need to remove that and pay attention to the facts and what the facts say about real estate valuation and what's going on in the industry and the market, strictly by the facts. I hope that makes sense, but not your gut.
Could you, and we talked about this prior at some point, but about implicit bias that comes in, and Ken, you had said there's some training in that's part of the ongoing training. Could you explain how that factors in? Because that's obviously connected to emotional responses. Can you guys just say a couple words about implicit bias and why that's a concern?
There are some implicit bias training programs that you can do online, and we were encouraged by the president of the National Association of Realtors in 2021 that anybody who is on a committee for the National Association of Realtors, which would encompass many, many people, they were strongly encouraged to take this implicit bias training, where you're given certain scenarios and then you indicate how you respond, or the questions are rather subtle, actually, and you might come up with a surprising result. You didn't think you were that biased, and you are. So that creates some awareness. The other kind of training that we were asked to do was a simulation, again, online, called Fair Haven. It was a simulation of 10 situations where a realtor was interacting with a certain scenario of buyers and sellers. And some were of color, some were not of color, some were Fairhaven was a community that had some bad areas and some good areas, quote unquote, right? And so we worked through that whole simulation as well. And if you want to check it out, it's called Fairhaven simulation. It came out of the Long Island study where they found there was a lot of bias in real estate. So the president of the association asked us that we should be taking this training as leaders in the real estate industry.
Jacqui or AJ, want to add anything about implicit bias?
Jacqui, go ahead.
Well, I think I had already indicated that, well, I had watched that video on implicit bias, and I think that was in relation to what Ken's talking about with Brookhaven. I think I'm saying it right. A simulation where you can kind of, well, I'm sorry, say it again. Fairhaven.
Fairhaven, yes.
Yeah, Fairhaven. You can kind of recognize what your own biases are. And again, was really going back to treat everybody exactly the same, have a script prepared for that, and don't go with your gut because you feel like you're with same people, if that makes any sense. That my family is very diverse, so that idea of same people for me is I think a little bit looser than it might be for some other people, but that you treat everybody the same and that you don't just go with your gut to do things differently in one situation than you would in another when the facts are the same.
If I could move us forward to the next question, and Antonio Avalos actually had asked this question that we were actually going to consider about what happens when someone doesn't follow the code of ethics. So the enforcement, punishment, what happens in the profession, I guess, especially is where we'd be concerned about this. If professionals are violating that fiduciary responsibility and not doing their job and they're unethical, what happens?
Well, first of all, ethical complaints can be lodged by the public or other realtors with the Association of Realtors. So if there is an ethical complaint, and we do get them at the Fresno Association of Realtors and also at the California Association of Realtors. So when there's an ethical complaint, it goes to a grievance committee to review the complaint, who then makes a decision that if this complaint is something that, if it were proven to be true, was a violation of the code of ethics, it would move onward to a hearing panel by the Professional Standards Committee. And then the panel hears the case, makes a decision as to what the consequence could be. It could be anything from a letter in their file for a year in case the problem shows up again, to a $15,000 fine. Then also, depending on the severity of the offense, a photograph of the offender is taken and submitted onto the website of the California Association of Realtors, describing the offense. So if you want to know what people do wrong, it makes for good case studies, by the way. Go to the car.org and check out the case studies of realtors who, unfortunately, in California, failed to meet their ethical requirements.
Ken, in the chat also is a related question, which is, what's the most common complaint about ethical lapses in the real estate industry?
Well, I would say probably one of the most common would be failure to promote or protect the interests of the client. Another one is unfair advertising, untrue advertising. Article 12 says that we're to present a true picture in our advertising. And then between realtors, very often there's an ethical complaint about one realtor interfered with the agency relationship of another realtor.
I was going to add that, well, that side is related again to the National Association of Realtors, right? Which is this It is, realtors, real estate agents, becoming members of that and then abiding by that. But all persons that transact real estate in the state of California must be licensed with the state of California. And so you can, as a consumer, you can go to the Department of Real Estate and file a complaint. Complaint could be actually for a real estate agent, a licensed real estate agent who's done something incorrectly or something that is, against the law. Or there's a lot of filings, complaints for real estate activity done by individuals who are not real estate agents, or who have not passed the exam, and paid all the fees and dues and all that to the Department of Real Estate. So the Department of Real Estate has a whole department that is in charge of all the disciplinary actions to people, real estate agents or not, that have, committed some, failure to abide by the California real estate law. And so you can go and actually go and check, each rate agent. You could go and check Jacqui Curry, you could check, Ken Neufeld, and see if they have any disciplinary actions,
Right.
if their license is, one of the most common things that you see there is that failure to renew or failure to renew the license, or the broker fails to, renew the
Supervise.
license, or, whatever it is. And so you can go and check and see if that person has any, disciplinary actions, whether they're present, concurrent, or they are, or in the past as well. And so, it's kind of like courthouse. You go through a trial, and it's very interesting what happens in that side of the Department of Real Estate as well.
I might add, in keeping with your comments, Dr. AJ, on the Department of Real Estate, when we in our ethics panels run across violations that involve fraud or a violation of the public trust, we are obligated to send that onward to the Department of Real Estate as well.
And I believe those letters of warning and reprimand become part of the DRE file as well. Is that correct, Ken?
They would, if we forward it to the DRE, yes.
I also,
and sorry, the penalties for violations of the Department of, the code of the California, law could go from, a letter like Jacqui was saying, Dr. Kerr was saying, or to getting suspended, to revoking your license, to you're done, So depending on how big of an issue, you're doing or you've done.
Mm-hmm.
and I was just going to add, sort of related to that, is if you have a realtor who has not renewed their code of ethics training, I believe they're suspended from practicing any real estate transactions until they do, in fact, take and pass the training. And so I think that's a really important barrier to, you don't want to, you don't want to delay, that's for sure. You would definitely take the training on time to avoid suspension.
Sometimes ethics training is assigned as a punishment, so you do something wrong and they say, you must take so many hours of ethics training. That to me is backwards, right? The ethics training should be preventative.
Yes.
It's like it's like when the driving, you're driving, and then at some point you need to go and take a course on defensive driving.
Traffic school, yeah.
Everybody should take a course on
Right.
defensive driving before taking the license, right?
And I think that consequence is really apropos, that you are suspended from practicing until you do that due diligence up front, right? And take that training and pass it Yeah.
Well, so I'm looking at, I want to be mindful of our time. We got about 10 minutes to go. We had one, I think, very simple question in the Q&A, which is it the same training for brokers and realtors? There's someone who is pursuing both licenses. And so I think that might be a simple, I think the other question is very complicated, has to do with different valuations per square foot from, across the street from one another, more or less. Like, how do we explain that? I don't know if you want to address either of those questions quickly before we kind of wrap things up.
I can quickly address the broker versus salesperson. There are two basic licenses in the state of California, either a broker's license or a salesperson's license. Most people get a salesperson's license, which they must then hang with a broker who is going to supervise them. So a salesperson needs to pass 70% on the exam, and a broker, if you're taking the broker's exam, you need to pass 80%. But in terms of your ethics training and your 45-hour continuing ed, everybody's got to do that. Unless you're over 70 years old and you've been in business 30 years, then you don't have to do it anymore.
The wisdom of old age. Anyone want to offer an answer to Myrna about the valuation?
I'll try to take the second question. And I think that what could be happening in this situation is that when real estate agents, they come to, a seller interested in helping them sell the house, they bring in information on comparable houses that have been recently sold. Within those comparables, right, you're going to find the idea is to try to find comparable houses. So you may have in a neighborhood that certain houses are larger and others are smaller. And so you may end up having differences in the price per square footage because when they're presented, when they're presenting comparables, they're trying to compare apples to apples. And so a smaller house, right, will have potentially a comparable house that is as well as small, whereas a large house would have a comparable that is a larger house. And so here is where there might be some differences when you look at, square footage, price per square footage. In general, it shouldn't divert too much. I think, again, going back to what Ken mentioned, is in the end, it's the market what dictates, or should be the market what dictates, prices. And so you wouldn't expect to see too much divergence from markets, market prices when you're selling your property.
I could add a little bit on the price per square foot if you want me to. And that is a couple of things. First of all, it depends what's in the square feet. So it depends on the condition of those square feet. And secondly, it depends on whether you're comparing a 1,200 square foot home and a 1,600 square foot home. The price per square foot of the smaller home is going to be larger than the price per square foot of the larger home. The reason being, those last 400 square feet did not cost as much to reproduce as the first 1,200 square feet.
Yeah, and also to the square foot point, I would be interested to know, if we're talking about different school districts, different builders, what other factors can be contributed to that price difference? It can get pretty granular in Fresno.
Yes.
I'm attentive to our time, so let's head to our kind of our sum up time here. So one question, just kind of easy softball question to each of you. What needs to happen next to in terms of ethics training? Implicit bias, obviously that's interesting and important that the real estate profession's now attending to that. Are there other things that ought to be attended to in terms of ethics, and how can we continue to improve what we're doing here in our world and make this world a better place? Maybe I'm just on my screen, start with Jacqui, we'll go to Ken, and then AJ, when you wrap this up, maybe you could also say something about what the Gazarian Real Estate Center's up to. That might be helpful too. So
excellent.
Jacqui,
thank you.
So, my hopes and worries for the future, I think education is important, especially ethics training up front, and then continuing the educational training. I keep wrapping around to this word trust. There's just so many trust relationships within a real estate transaction. We already talked about how many different professionals have their hands in one transaction, and a buyer and a seller. I know I'm making it very simplistic and it's not, but you have a buyer and a seller that are really trusting these professionals to communicate with each other, be honest with each other. I think in the future, I'd like to see a little bit more transparency added to those transactions. I'm not exact. I mean, I have my own ideas of what that would look like, but I'd like to see that trust relationship backed up with some evidence as well. And so I think that would be my hope, is that in the future, real estate education and training is a little bit more transparent on the transaction side for everyone.
Transparent to the public, the clients, the
Even realtor to realtor. So the code of ethics has those three prongs, right? Clients, public, and then realtors. I think all three of those, there needs to be a little bit more transparency than we currently have.
great. Jacqui, thank you. Ken, how about you? What's your vision of the future?
I think the future will see even a greater emphasis on enforcement and training, especially in the area of fair housing, and more ethics training, and the importance of promoting and protecting the interests of the client.
In the fair housing bit, you mean like access for previously excluded and
Equal
underrepresented?
housing opportunities, essentially, yes.
Yeah, I think that's obviously important, especially in our region where we know that there are, deep inequalities that still need to be addressed.
Definitely.
Ken, thank you. AJ, you want to kind of conclude this for us and wrap it up? So what's your vision of the future? And then explain to us a little bit about the Gazarian Center in a few minutes.
Sure, thank you. So I'm gonna echo both what Ken and Jacqui mentioned. There's probably, we're gonna see more of a wave of additional training required, education required before, like I mentioned, before licensing, after licensing, and practice. And then I think that what we will see also is that, and it's probably already happening, is that, we just talked about from a national association of realtors perspective, or from a group of real estate agents that have a common, purpose, right? But if you talk about, if you look at how the industry actually works, you have, the brokerage firms, right? And so they are within their own companies, and they interact with other companies that have the same purpose, is to try to sell, real estate. And so I think that there's going to be a lot more in-house training, which is already happening, but particularly we're going to see that a lot of the training that these companies are going to do before they actually send out their agents to the to the field, right? And so one of the things we tell our students is that when they choose a real estate company, if they ever consider being real estate agents, when they choose, a company to work for, a broker to work for that, they look into the training that they offer. Because, well, I mean, we try to do, they have to take some courses. We teach them beyond what those courses required are, but again, we cannot cover everything. I mean, college, we are, we try to make better citizens, right? And that they can work and go out in the workforce. But it's going to depend a lot on the in-house training also as well, to provide some of those, necessary tools to do things the right way. So that's to wrap up on with the discussion. The Gazarian Real Estate Center, we're doing in the next few weeks, we have a few other workshops. Next one for us would be March 31st. we'll have Andrew Hausler, who is the assistant city manager for the city of Clovis. And so he's going to be talking about what's happening in the city of Clovis. And then we're also working with a local organization called Commercial Real Estate, Women in Commercial Real Estate. We're also working on putting together a few events on local real estate issues as well. So we again welcome everybody to join us, and we're happy to see you next time. Thank you, Andrew, for this opportunity. It's been wonderful. I wanted to add on that Dr. Gazarian provided the funding for this, the Gazarian Real Estate Center to start many years ago. And his vision was that we would, the Gazarian Real Estate Center would actually enhance ethical professionalism in the real estate industry. So we're doing this, we're because of him, and because of, we really value the impact of ethical education in the profession.
This is great. AJ, thank you for thinking this whole thing up, and thanks for reaching out across campus. It's kind of cool that, Craig School of Business and College of Arts and Humanities, that we could do this collaboration. And thank you to Ken Neufeld for your expertise and wisdom. And Jacqui Curry, thank you for appearing. And it's really nice to see you in person, because we've collaborated before. So, and I'd like to also thank Ebony, who's in the background. She's my student assistant this semester who's producing this. I'd like to thank our audience for joining us, and wish everyone a good night.